Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. It is time for the second and hopefully final episode of me reading the Communist Manifesto, written by Friedrich Engels and Karl Marx. So, let's start where we ended, and that is Chapter 2, Proletarians and Communists. In what relation do the communists stand to the proletarians as a whole? The communists do not form a separate party opposed to other working class parties. They have no interests separate and apart from those of the proletariat as a whole. They do not set up any separate principles of their own by which to shape and mold the proletarian movement. The communists are distinguished from the other working class parties by this only. 1. In the national struggles of the proletarians of the different countries, they point out and bring to the front the common interests of the entire proletariat, independently of all nationality. Seems like a good fucking idea. 2. In the various stages of development which a struggle of the working class against the bourgeoisie has to pass through, they always and everywhere represent the interests of the movement as a whole. The communists, therefore, are on the one hand practically the most resolute section of the working class parties of every country, that section which pushes forward all others. On the other hand, theoretically, they have over the great mass of the proletariat the advantage of clearly understanding the line of march, the conditions, and the ultimate general results of the proletarian movement. The immediate aim of the communists is the same as that of all the other proletarian parties: formations of the proletariat into a class, overthrow of the bourgeoisie supremacy, conquest of political power by the proletariat. The theoretical conclusions of the communists are in no way based on ideas or principles that have been invented or discovered by this or that would-be universal reformer. They merely express, in general terms, actual relations springing from an existing class struggle, from a historical movement going on under our very eyes. The abolition of existing property relations is not at all a distinctive feature of communism. All property relations in the past were subject to constant historical replacement, constant historical change. The French Revolution, for example, abolished feudal property in favor of bourgeois property. The distinguishing feature of communism is not the abolition of property generally, but the abolition of bourgeois property. But modern bourgeois private property is the final and most complete expression of the system of producing and appropriating products that is based on class antagonisms, on the exploitation of some by others. In this sense, the theory of the communists may be summed up in the single sentence: abolition of private property. We communists have been reproached with the desire of abolishing the right of personally acquiring property as the fruit of a man's own labor, which property is alleged to be the groundwork of all personal freedom, activity, and independence. Hand one's self-acquired, self-earned property. Do you mean the property of the petty bourgeois and of the small peasant, a form of property that preceded the bourgeois form? There is no need to abolish that. The development of industry has to a great extent already destroyed it, and is still destroying it daily. Or do you mean modern bourgeois private property? But does wage labor create any property for the laborer? Not a bit. It creates capital, i.e. that kind of property which exploits wage labor, which cannot increase except upon condition of begetting a new supply of wage labor for fresh exploitation. Property, in its present form, is based on the antagonism of capital and wage labor. Let us examine both sides of this antagonism. To be a capitalist is to have not only a purely personal but a social status in production. Capital is a collective product, and social status in production, and only by the united action of many members, nay, in the last resort, only by the united action of all members of society, can it be set in motion. Capital is, therefore, not a personal, it is a social power. I agree. When, therefore, capital is converted into common property, into the property of all members of society, personal property is not thereby transformed into social property. It is only the social character of the property that is changed, loses its class character. Let us now take wage labor. which is something I'm actively trying to engage in by getting a fucking job. As someone in the Discord has rightfully told me, the average price of wage labor is the minimum wage, i.e., that quantum of the means of subsistence which is absolutely requisite to keep the laborer in bare existence as a laborer. What, therefore, the wage laborer appropriates by means of his labor merely suffices to prolong and reproduce a bare existence. We by no means intend to abolish this personal appropriation of the products of labor, an appropriation that is made for the maintenance and reproduction of human life, and that leaves no surplus wherewith to command the labor of others. All that we want to do away with is the miserable character of this appropriation, under which the laborer lives merely to increase capital, and is allowed to live only insofar as the interest of the ruling class requires it. In bourgeois society, living labor is but a means to increase accumulated labor. In communist society, accumulated labor is but a means to widen, to enrich, to promote the existence of the laborer. Sounds like a good idea, honestly. In bourgeois society, therefore, the past dominates the present. In communist society, the present dominates the past. In bourgeois society, capital is independent and has individuality, while the living person is dependent and has no individuality. You know, if I could, I put up the, the gif of, no lies detected, Shit, has no individuality. And the abolition of this state of things is called by the bourgeois abolition of individuality and freedom, and rightly so. The abolition of bourgeois individuality, bourgeois independence, and bourgeois freedom is undoubtedly aimed at. By freedom is meant, under the present bourgeois conditions of production, free trade, free selling and buying. But if selling and buying disappears, free selling and buying disappears also. This talk about free selling and buying, and all the other brave words of our bourgeoisie about freedom in general, have a meaning, if any, only in contrast with restricted selling and buying, with the fettered traders of the Middle Ages, but have no meaning when opposed to the communistic abolition of buying and selling, of the bourgeois conditions of production, and the bourgeoisie itself. You are horrified at our intending to do away with private property, but in your existing society, private property is already done away with for 9/10 of the population. Its existence is solely due to its non-existence in the hands of those 9/10. You reproach us, therefore, with intending to do away with a form of property that the necessary condition for whose existence is the non-existence of any property for the immense majority of society. In one word, you reproach us with intending to do away with your property. Precisely so, that is just what we intend. From the moment when labor can no longer be converted into capital, money or rent, into a social power capable of being monopolized, i.e., from the moment when individual property can no longer be transformed into bourgeois property, from that moment, you say, individuality vanishes. You must therefore confess that by individual you mean no other person than the bourgeois, than the middle-class owner of property. This person must indeed be swept out of the way. Excuse me. It's very thirsty. Communism deprives no man of the power to appropriate the products of society. All that it does is to deprive him of the power to subjugate the labor of others by means of such appropriation. It has been objected that upon the abolition of private property, all work will cease, and universal laziness will overtake us. According to this, bourgeois society ought long ago to have gone to the dogs through sheer idleness. For those of its members who work acquire nothing, and those who acquire anything do not work. That's still true to this fucking day. The whole of this objection is but another expression of the tautology that there can no longer be any wage labor when there's no longer any capital. All objections urged against the communistic mode of producing and appropriating material products have in the same way been urged against the communistic modes of producing and appropriating intellectual products. Just as to the bourgeois, the disappearance of class property is the disappearance of production itself, so the disappearance of class culture is to him identical with the disappearance of all culture. That culture, the loss of which he laments, is for the enormous majority a mere training to act as a machine. But don't wrangle with us so long as you apply to the abolition of bourgeois property. The center of your bourgeois notions of freedom, culture, law, I'm assuming that's supposed to be etc. Because it's like an ampersand and C. Your very ideas are but the outgrowth of the conditions of your bourgeois production and bourgeois property, just as your jurisprudence is but the will of your class made into a law for all, a will whose essential content is determined by the material conditions of existence of your class. The selfish conception that induces you to transform into internal laws of nature and of reason, the social forms springing from your present mode of production and form of property, historical relations that rise and disappear in the progress of production, this conception you share with every ruling class that has disappeared. What you see clearly in the case of ancient property, what you admit in the case of feudal property, you are of course forbidden to admit in the case of your own bourgeois form of property. Abolition of the family. Even the most radical flare-up at this infamous proposal of the communists. On what foundation is the present family, the bourgeois family, based? On capital, on private gain. In its completely developed form, this family exists only among the bourgeoisie. But this state of things finds its complement in the practical absence of the family among the proletarians and in public prostitution. The bourgeois family will vanish as a matter of course when its complement vanishes, and both will vanish with the vanishing of capital. Do you charge us with wanting to stop the exploitation of children by their parents? To this crime, we plead guilty. Guilty. And, you know, I'm actually in favor of getting rid of the fucking parents being able to fuck with their kids. But you will say, we destroy the most hallowed of relations when we replace home education by social. And your education is not that also social and determined by the social conditions under which you educate, by the intervention, direct or indirect, of society by means of schools. Again, I'm supposed. It's literally like a fucking ampersand. It's literally like an ampersand and a C. So I'm assuming that's etc. Or etc. I don't fucking know. The communists have not invented the intervention of society in education. They do but seek to alter the character of that intervention and to rescue education from the influence of the ruling class. The bourgeois claptrap about the family and education, about the hallowed correlation of parent and child, becomes all the more disgusting, the more by the action of modern industry. I pronounced that more weirder than I should have. All family ties among the proletarians are torn asunder, and their children transformed into simple articles of commerce and instruments of labor. But you communists would introduce community of women, screams the whole bourgeoisie in chorus. The bourgeois sees in his wife a mere instrument of production. He hears that the instruments of production are to be exploited in common, and naturally can come to no other conclusion than that the lot of being common to all will likewise fall to the women. He has not even a suspicion that the real point aimed at is to do away with the status of women as mere instruments of production. That is still fucking... Just look at a lot of the fucking right-wing middle class, and a lot of the left-wing middle class, too, of, like, you know, just this whole idea of, like, women being property and, you know... Seriously. This idea of, like, you know, giving women, you know, more power and giving women equal power to men, like... That's a good idea, and a lot of people fucking ignore this or just, you know, kind of obfuscate it. For the rest, nothing is more ridiculous than the virtuous indignation of our bourgeois at the community of women which they pretend is to be openly and officially established by the communists. The communists have no need to introduce community of women. It has existed almost from time immemorial. Our bourgeois, not content with having the wives and daughters of their proletarians at their disposal, not just be common prostitutes, take the greatest pleasure in seducing each other's wives. That's Donald Trump to a fucking T. Bourgeois marriage is in reality a system of wives in common, and thus at the most, what the communists might possibly be reproached with is that they desire to introduce in substitution for a hypocritically concealed and openly legalized community of women. For the rest, it is self-evident that the abolition of the present system of production must bring with the abolition of the community of women springing from that system, i.e. of prostitution both public and private. The communists are further reproached with desiring to abolish countries and nationality. The working men have no country. We cannot take from them what they have not got. Since the proletariat must first of all acquire political supremacy, must rise to be the national class, must constitute itself the nation, it is so far itself national, though not in the bourgeois sense of the word. National differences and antagonisms between peoples are daily more and more vanishing, owing to the development of the bourgeoisie, to freedom of commerce, to the world market, to uniformity in the mode of production and in the conditions of life corresponding thereto. The supremacy of the proletariat will cause them to vanish still faster. United action of the leading civilized countries, at least, is one of the first conditions for the emancipation of the proletariat. In proportion as the exploitation of one individual by another is put an end to, the exploitation of one nation by another will also be put an end to. That seems like a good idea, not exploiting other fucking countries. In proportion as the antagonism between classes within the nation vanishes, the hostility of one nation to another will come to an end. Yeah, generally probably true. The charges against communism made from a religious, a philosophical, and generally from an ideological standpoint are not deserving of serious examination. Does it require deep intuition to comprehend that man's ideas, views, and conceptions, in one word, man's consciousness, changes with every change in the conditions of his existence, in his social relations, and in his social life? What else does the history of ideas prove than that intellectual production changes in character in proportion as material production is changed? The ruling class of each age have ever been the idea of its ruling class. When people speak of ideas that revolutionize society, they do but express the fact that within the old society, the elements of a new one have been created, and that the dissolution of the old ideas keeps even pace with the dissolution of the old conditions of existence. When the ancient world was in its last throes, the ancient religions were overcome by Christianity. When Christian ideas succumbed in the 18th century to the ideas of the Enlightenment, feudal society fought its death battle with the then revolutionary bourgeoisie. The ideas of religious liberty and freedom of conscience merely gave expression to the sway of free competition within the domain of knowledge. Undoubtedly, it will be said, religious, moral, philosophical, political, jurisdictional development, but religion, morality, philosophy, political science, and law constantly survived this change. There are, besides, eternal truths, such as freedom, justice, etc. There's actually just an etc. It's fucking... So I don't know what the fuck those ampersands and C's were. I'm assuming that was just a typo. And they caught it now, but they didn't catch it earlier. But communism abolishes eternal truths. It abolishes all religion and all morality. Instead of constituting them on a new basis, it therefore acts in contradiction to all past historical experience. What did this accusation reduce itself to? The history of all past society has consisted in the development of class antagonisms that assume different forms at different epochs. But whatever form they have taken, one fact is common to all pages. Is that supposed to be vis-a-vis? Because this is V-I-Z, period. Is that supposed to be an abbreviation for vis-a-vis? The exploitation of one part of society by the other. No wonder, then, that the social consciousness of past ages, despite all the multiplicity and variety it displays, moves within certain common forms, in forms of consciousness which cannot completely vanish except with the total disappearance of class antagonisms. The communist revolution is the most radical rupture with traditional property relations. No wonder that its development involves the most radical rupture with traditional ideas. But let us have done with the bourgeois objections to communism. We have seen above that the first step in the revolution by the working class is to raise the proletariat to the position of ruling class, to win the battle of democracy. The proletariat will use its political supremacy to wrest, by degrees, all capital from the bourgeoisie, to decentralize all instruments of production in the hands of the state, i.e., all the proletariat organize as the ruling class, and to increase the total of productive forces as rapidly as possible. I apologize for the barking that you fucking hear. It's my fucking neighbors being assholes. Of course, in the beginning, this cannot be effected except by means of despotic inroads on the rights of property and on the conditions of bourgeois production. By means of measures, therefore, which appear economically insufficient and untenable, but which, in the course of the movement, outstrip themselves and are unavoidable as a means of entirely revolutionizing the mode of production. These measures will, of course, be different in different countries. Nevertheless, in all the most advanced countries, the following will be pretty generally applicable. 1. Exploitation of property in land and application of all rents of land to public purposes. 2. A heavy progressive tax. 3. Abolition of all right of inheritance. That sounds like a fucking great idea. 4. Confiscation of the property of all immigrants and rebels. 5. Centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank with state capital and exclusive monopoly. 6. Centralization of transport in the hands of the state. 7. Extensions of factories and instruments of production owned by the state, the bringing into cultivation of wastelands, and the improvement of the soil generally in accordance with a common plan. 9. Equal liability of all to labor, establishment of industrial armies, especially for agriculture, combination of agriculture with industry, promotion of the gradual elimination of the contradictions between town and countryside. 10. Free education for all children in public schools, abolition of children's factory labor in its present form, combination of education with industrial production, again, ampersand C, period, comma, ampersand C. I have no like, seriously, what the fuck is this? Yeah. Look at this ampersand C shit. Like, when in all the courses of development, class distinctions have disappeared, and all production has been concentrated in the hands of associated individuals, the public power will lose its political character. Political power, property so called, is merely the organized power of one class for oppressing another. If the proletariat during its contest with the bourgeoisie is compelled, by the force of circumstances, to organize itself as a class, if by means of revolution it makes itself the ruling class, and as such sweeps away by force the old conditions of production, then it will, along with these conditions, have swept away the conditions for the existence of class antagonisms and of classes generally, and will thereby have abolished its own supremacy of a class as a class. Excuse me. In place of the old bourgeois society with its classes and class antagonisms, we shall have an association in which the free development of each is the condition for the free development of all. I'm just gonna take a fucking quick. Is there a fucking table of contents? There should be a table of fucking. Okay, so. The fuck? So, I have just gotten to 3. Let's see. Fuck it. It's really short. This will be like an hour long, probably. 3. Socialist and communist literature. Reactionary socialism. A. Feudal socialism. Owing to their historical position, it became the vocation of the aristocracies of France and England to write pamphlets against modern bourgeois society. I can't fucking... My brain is just not great with... Like, I keep thinking it says bourgeoisie, but it's actually bourgeois. I'm not great with fucking French words, is what I'm getting at. The French Revolution of July 1830 and in the English Reformation, English Reform agitation, these aristocracies again succumbed to the hateful upstart. Thenceforth, a serious political contest was altogether out of question. I feel like that should be out of the question, but whatever. Literary battle alone remained possible. But even in the domain of literature, the old cries of the Restoration period had become impossible. In order to arouse sympathy, the aristocracy were obliged to lose sight, apparently, of their own interests and to formulate their indictment against the bourgeoisie in the interest of the exploited working class alone. Thus, the aristocracy took their revenge by singing lampoons on their new master and whispering in his ears more or less sinister prophecies. In this way rose feudal socialism, half lamentation, half lampoon, half echo of the past, half menace of the future, at times by its bitter, witty, and incisive criticism, striking the bourgeoisie to the very heart's core, but always ludicrous in its effect through total incapacity to comprehend the march of modern history. The aristocracy, in order to rally the people to them, waved the proletarian alms bag in front for a banner. But the people, so often as it joined them, saw on their hindquarters the old feudal coat of arms, and deserted with loud and irreverent laughter. One section of the French Legitimists and Young England exhibited this spectacle. My fucking nose. In pointing out that their mode of exploitation was different to that of the bourgeoisie, the feudalists forgot that they exploited under circumstances and conditions that were quite different and that are now antiquated. In showing that, under their rule, the modern proletariat never existed, they forgot that the modern bourgeoisie is the necessary offspring of their own form of society. For the rest, so little do they conceal the reactionary character of the criticism that their chief accusation against the bourgeoisie amounts to this, that under the bourgeoisie regime, a class is being developed which is destined to cut up root and branch the old order of society. What they upbraid the bourgeoisie with is not so much that it creates a proletariat as that it creates a revolutionary proletariat. In political practice, therefore, they join in all coercive measures against the working class and in ordinary life, despite their highfalutin phrases. That's great. That's a great phrase. Highfalutin phrases. They stoop to pick up the golden apples and to barter truth, love, and honor for traffic in wool, beetroot, sugar, and potato spirits. I assume that's vodka. I want to say it's vodka, but I could be fucking wrong. As the parson has ever gone hand in hand with the feudal lord, so has clerical socialism with feudal socialism. Nothing is easier than to give Christian asceticism give asceticism a socialist tinge. Has not Christianity declaimed against private property, against marriage, against the state? Has it not preached in the place of charity and poverty, celibacy and mortification of the flesh, monastic life, and mother church? Christian socialism is but the holy water with which the priest consecrates the heart burnings of the aristocrat. B. Petty bourgeois socialism. The feudal aristocracy... I'm just checking something. Okay. Anyway. Upon and perished in the atmosphere of modern bourgeois society. The medieval burgesses and the small peasant proprietors were the precursors of the modern bourgeoisie. In those countries which are but little developed industrially and commercially, this class still vegetates side by side with the rising bourgeoisie. In countries where modern civilization has become fully developed, a new class of bourgeois, has been formed, fluctuating between proletariat and bourgeoisie, and ever renewing itself as a supplementary part of bourgeois society. The individual members of this class, however, are being constantly hurled down into the proletariat by the action of competition, and as modern industry develops, they even see the moment approaching when they will completely disappear as an independent section of modern society, to be replaced in manufacture, agriculture, and commerce by overlookers, bailiffs, and shopmen. In countries like France, where the peasants constitute far more than half of the population, it was natural that writers who sided with the proletariat against the bourgeoisie should use, in their criticism of the bourgeois regime, the standard of the peasant and petty bourgeois, and from the standpoint of the petty bourgeoisie, should take up the cudgels for the working class. Thus arose petty bourgeois socialism. Sismondi was the head of this school, not only in France but also in England. This school of socialism dissected with great acuteness the contradictions in the conditions of modern production. It laid bare the hypocritical apologies of economists. It proved incontrovertibly the disastrous effects of machinery and division of labor, the concentration of capital and land in a few hands, overproduction and crises, it pointed out, the inevitable ruin of the petty bourgeois and peasant, the misery of the proletariat, the anarchy in production, the crying inequalities in the distribution of wealth, the industrial war of extermination between nations, the dissolution of old moral bonds, of the old family relations, of the old nationalities. In its positive aims, however, this form of socialism aspires either to restoring the old means of production and of exchange, and with them the old property relations and the old society, or to cramping the modern means of production and of exchange within the framework of the old property relations that have been, and were bound to be, exploited by those means. In other case, it is both reactionary and utopian. Its last words are corporate guilds for manufacture, patriarchal relations in agriculture. In its further development, this trend ended in a cowardly fit of the blues. C. German, or true, in quotes, socialism. The socialist and communist literature of France, a literature that originated under the pressure of bourgeoisie and power, and that was the expression of the struggle against this power, was introduced into Germany at a time when the bourgeoisie in that country had just begun its contest with feudal absolutism. German philosophers, semi-philosophers, and fine spirits eagerly seized on this literature, only forgetting that when these writings immigrated from France into Germany, French social conditions had not immigrated along with them. In contact with German social conditions, this French literature lost all its immediate practical significance and assumed a purely literary aspect. It must have appeared as idle speculation on true society, on the realization of the human essence. Thus, to the German philosophers of the 18th century, the demands of the First French Revolution were nothing more than the demands of practical reason in general, and the utterance of the will of the revolutionary French bourgeoisie signified, in their eyes, the laws of pure will, as it was bound to be, of true human will generally. The work of the German literati, that's a great fucking word, I love that word, literati, consisted solely in bringing the new French ideas into harmony with their ancient philosophical conscience, or rather, in annexing the French ideas without deserting their own philosophic point of view. This annexation took place in the same way in which a foreign language is appropriated namely by translation. It is well known how the monks wrote silly lies of Catholic saints over the manuscripts on which the classical works of ancient heathendom had been written. The German literati reversed this process with the profane French literature. They wrote their philosophical nonsense beneath the French original. For instance, beneath the French criticism of money relations, they wrote alienation of humanity, and beneath the French criticism of the bourgeois state, they wrote transcendence of the domination of the abstractly general, etc. The introduction of these philosophical phrases at the back of the French theories they dubbed philosophy of action, true socialism, German science of socialism, philosophical foundation of socialism, and so on. The French socialist and communist literature was thus completely emasculated. And since it ceased in the hands of the German to express the struggle of one class with the other, he felt conscious of having overcome French one-sidedness and of representing not true requirements, but the requirements of truth. Not the interests of the proletariat, but the interests of human nature, of man in general, who belongs to no class, has no reality, who exists only in the misty realm of philosophical fantasy. This German socialism, which took its schoolboy tasks so seriously and solemnly, and extolled its poor stock in trade in such mountebank fashion, meanwhile gradually lost its pedantic innocence. The fight of the German, and especially of the Prussian bourgeoisie, against feudal aristocracy and absolute monarchy, in other words, the liberal movement, became more earnest. By this, the long wished-for opportunity was offered to true socialism, of confronting the political movement with the socialist demands, of hurling the tradition anathemas against liberalism, against representative government, against bourgeois competition, bourgeois freedom of the press, bourgeois legislation, bourgeois liberty and equality, and of preaching to the masses that they had nothing to gain and everything to lose. By this bourgeois movement, German socialism forgot, in the nick of time, that the French criticism, whose silly echo it was, presupposed the existence of modern bourgeois society, with its corresponding material conditions of existence and the political constitutions adapted thereto, the very things whose attainment was the object of the pending struggle in Germany. Alright, how many fucking more pages? Okay, so to the German absolute governments, with their following of parsons, professors, county squires, and officials, it served as a welcome scarecrow against the threatening bourgeoisie. It was a sweet finish after the bitter pills of flogging and bullets which these same governments dosed the German working class risings. While this true socialism thus served the governments as a weapon for fighting the German bourgeoisie, it at the same time directly represented a reactionary interest, the interest of the German Philistines. In Germany, the petty bourgeois class, a relic of the 16th century, and since then constantly cropping up again under various forms, is the real social basis of the existing state of things. I can't fucking talk today. To preserve this class is to preserve the existing state of things in Germany. The industrial political supremacy of the bourgeoisie threatens it with certain destruction. On the one hand, from the concentration of capital, on the other, from the rise of a revolutionary proletariat. True socialism appeared to kill these two birds with one stone. It spread like an epidemic. The robe of the speculative cobwebs, embroidered with flowers of rhetoric, steeped in the dew of sickly sentiment, this transcendental robe in which the German socialists wrapped their sorry eternal truths, all skin and bone, served to wonderfully increase the sale of their goods amongst such a public. And on its part, German socialism recognized more and more its own calling as the bombastic representative of the petty bourgeois Philistine. It proclaimed the German nation to be the model nation, and the German petty Philistine to be the typical man. To every villainous meanness of this model gave a hidden, higher socialistic interpretation, the exact contrary of its real character, and went to the extreme length of directly opposing the brutally destructive tendency of communism, and of proclaiming its supreme and impartial contempt for all class struggles. With very few exceptions, all the so-called socialist and communist publications that now, 1847, circulate in Germany belong to the domains of this foul and enervating literature. 2. Or II. Conservative or bourgeois socialism. A part of the bourgeoisie is desirous of redressing social grievances in order to secure the continued existence of bourgeois society. To this section belongs economists, philanthropists, humanitarians, improvers of the condition of the working class, organizers of charity, members of societies for the prevention of cruelty to animals, temperance fanatics, hole-in-corner reformers of every imaginable kind. This form of socialism has, moreover, been worked out into complete systems. There's a fucking, cut right across the fucking... It's a whole... This book has, weird, type, or, printing fucking weirdnesses. We may cite Proudhon's Philosophie de la Misère, as an example of this form. The socialistic bourgeois want to live in conditions of modern society without the struggles and dangers necessarily resulting therefrom. They desire the existing state of society, minus its revolutionary and disintegrating elements. They wish for a bourgeoisie without a proletariat. The bourgeoisie naturally conceives the world in which it is supreme to be the best, and bourgeois socialism develops this comfortable conception into a more or less complete system. In requiring the proletariat to carry out such a new system, and thereby to march straight away into the New Jerusalem, it but requires in reality that the new proletariat should remain within the new bounds of existing society, but should cast away all its hateful ideas concerning the bourgeoisie. A second and more practicable, but less systematic, form of this socialism sought to depreciate every revolutionary movement in the eyes of the working class by showing that no mere political reform, but only a change in the material conditions of existence and economical relations could be of any advantage to them. By changes in the material conditions of existence, this form of socialism, however, by no means understands abolition of the bourgeois relations of production, an abolition that can be effected only by a revolution, but administrative reforms based on the continued existence of these relations, reforms, therefore, that in no respect affect the relations between capital and labor, but at the best lessen the cost, to simplify the administrative work of bourgeois government. Bourgeois socialism attains adequate expression when, and only when, it becomes a mere figure of speech. Free trade for the benefit of the working class. Productive duties for the benefit of the working class. Solitary confinement for the benefit of the working class. This is the last word and the only seriously meant word of bourgeois socialism. It is summed up in the phrase, the bourgeois is a bourgeois for the benefit of the working class. Okay, there's 3 pages left. 3. Critical utopian socialism and communism. We do not here refer to that literature which in every great modern revolution has always given voice to the demands of the proletariat, such as the writings of Babeuf and others. The first direct attempts of the proletariat to attain its own ends, made in times of universal excitement when feudal society was being overthrown, these attempts necessarily failed, owing to the underdeveloped state of the proletariat, as well as to the absence of the material conditions for its emancipation, conditions that had yet to be produced and could be produced by the bourgeois epoch alone. The revolutionary literature that accompanied these first movements of the proletariat had necessarily a reactionary character. It inculcated universal asceticism and social leveling in its crudest form. The socialist and communist systems, properly so called, those of Saint Simon, Fourier, Owen, and others, spring into existence in the early underdeveloped period described above of the struggle between proletariat and bourgeoisie. See Section 1, Bourgeois and Proletarians, which I already read. Go see my video. The founders of these systems see, indeed, the class antagonisms as well as the action of the decomposing elements in the prevailing form of society. But the proletariat offers to them the spectacle of a class without any historical initiative and any independent political movement. Since the development of class antagonism keeps even pace with the development of industry, the economic situation as they find it does not yet offer to them the material conditions for the emancipation of the proletariat. They therefore search after a new social science, after social laws that are to create these conditions. Social action is to yield to their personal inventive action historically created conditions of emancipation to fantastic ones, and the gradual class organization of the proletariat to an organization of society itself specially contrived by these inventors. Future history resolves itself, in their eyes, into the propaganda and the practical carrying out of their social plans. In the formation of their plans, they are conscious of caring chiefly for the interests of the working class, as being the most suffering class. Only from the point of view of being the most suffering class does the proletariat exist for them. The underdeveloped state of the class struggle, as well as their own surroundings, causes socialists of this kind to consider themselves far superior to all class antagonisms. They want to improve the condition of every member of society, even that of the most favored. Hence, they habitually appeal to society at large, without distinction of class, nay, by preference to the ruling class. This kind of sounds like Bernie Sanders to me, but could just be this, just could be me. For how can people, when once they understand their system, fail to see it in the best possible plan of the best possible state of society? Hence, they reject all political and especially all revolutionary action. They wish to attain their ends by peaceful means, and endeavor by small experiments necessarily doomed to failure, and by the force of example, to pave the way for the new social gospel. Such fantastic pictures of wow. I blanked out on the pronunciation of future. I saw the word, I'm like, what? Painted at a time when the proletariat is still in a very undeveloped state, and has but a fantastic conception of its own position correspond with the first instinctive yearnings of that class for general reconstruction of society. But these socialist and communist publications contain also a critical element. They attack every principle of existing society. Hence, they are full of the most valuable materials for the enlightenment of the working class. Their positive propositions concerning the future society, for example, abolition of the contradiction between town and country, of the family of private profit, of the wage system, the proclamation of social harmony, the conversion of the functions of the state into a near superintendence of production. All of these proposals point solely to the disappearance of class antagonisms, which were, at that time, only just cropping up, and which, in these publications, are recognized in their earliest, indistinct, and undefined forms only. These proposals, therefore, are of a purely utopian character. The significance of critical utopian socialism and communism bears an inverse relation to historical development. In proportion as the class struggle develops and takes definite shape, this fantastic standing apart from the contest, these fantastic attacks on it, lose all practical value and all theoretical justification. Therefore, although the originators of these systems were, in many respects, revolutionary, their disciples have, in every case, formed mere reactionary sects. They hold fast by the original views of their masters, in opposition to the progressive historical development of the proletariat. They therefore endeavor, and that consistently, to deaden the class structure and to reconcile the class antagonisms. They still dream of experimental realization of their social utopias, of founding isolated phalansteries, of establishing home colonies, of setting up a little Icaria, duodecimo editions of the New Jerusalem. And to realize all these castles in the air, they're compelled to appeal to the feelings and purposes of the bourgeois. By degrees they sink into the category of the reactionary conservative socialists depicted above, differing from these only by more systematic pedantry, and by their fanatical and superstitious belief in the miraculous effects of their social science. They therefore violently oppose all political action on the part of the working class. Such action, according to them, can only result from blind unbelief in the new gospel. The overnights in England and the Fourierists in France, respectively, oppose the Chartists and the Reformists? But it's, I assume, in French? Let's fucking show it to you guys. Reformistes. And finally 4. Because after this it goes into the preface of the German edition. Position of the communists in relation to the various existing opposition parties. Section 2 has made clear the relations of the communists to the existing working class parties, such as the Chartists in England and the agrarian reformers in America. The communists fight for the attainment of the immediate aims for the enforcement of the momentary interests of the working class, but in the movement of the present, they also represent the future of that movement. In France, the communists ally themselves with the social democrats against the conservative and radical bourgeoisie, reserving, however, the right to take up a critical position in regard to phrases and allusions traditionally handed down from the Great Revolution. In Switzerland, they support the radicals, without losing sight of the fact that this party consists of antagonistic elements, partly of democratic socialists, and in the French sense, partly of radical bourgeois. In Poland, they support the party that insists on an agrarian revolution as the prime condition for national emancipation, that party which fomented the insurrection of Krakow in 1846. In Germany, they fight with the bourgeoisie whenever it acts in the revolutionary way, against the absolute monarchy, the feudal squirearchy, and the petty bourgeoisie. But they never cease for a single instant to instill into the working class the clearest possible recognition of the hostile antagonism between bourgeoisie and proletariat, in order that the German workers may straightaway use, as so many weapons against the bourgeoisie, the social and political conditions that the bourgeoisie must necessarily introduce along with its supremacy, and in order that after the fall of reactionary classes in Germany, the fight against the bourgeoisie itself may immediately begin. The communists turn their attention to chiefly to Germany, because that country is on the eve of a bourgeois revolution that is bound to be carried out under more advanced conditions of European civilization, and with a much more developed proletariat than that of England was in the 17th and of France in the 18th century. And because the bourgeois revolution in Germany will be but the prelude to an immediately following proletarian revolution. In short, the communists everywhere support every revolutionary movement against the existing social and political order of things. In all these movements, they bring to the front, as the leading questions in each, the property question, no matter what its degree of development at the time. In all these movements, they bring to the front, as the leading question in each, the property question, no matter what its degree. I already read that. Finally, they labor everywhere for the union and agreement of the democratic parties of all countries. The communists disdain to conceal their views and aims. They openly declare that their ends can be attained only by the forcible overthrow of all existing social conditions. Let the ruling classes tremble at a communistic revolution. The proletarians have nothing to lose but their chains. They have a world to win. And in all caps, working men of all countries unite. And that is the end of the Communist Manifesto. Because again, it goes to like the preface for the German edition. Preface, blah, blah, blah. I'm not reading the fucking prefaces prefaces to these fucking things. So yeah. That is me reading the fucking Communist Manifesto. And I uploaded the first part in this today. And I can't wait to fucking see what dipshittery probably gets commented on it. Because I put like SJW and Social Justice Warrior and a bunch of other like alt-right fucking trigger words. But so far, nothing. I don't know. Anyway. So yeah, ta-ta everybody. And may all working peoples, you know. Let me fucking... I'll change the... Working people of all countries unite. Everybody, you know, if you're not fucking bourgeoisie, get together and start cracking fucking bourgeoisie's heads. This is what I would say. But I'm not a great thinker like Karl Marx. I'm not a great writer like fucking Karl Marx or Friedrich Engels. Ta-ta everybody. Have a wonderful fucking day. And it's less than an hour long.